going to divert away from the cars for a bit with this video onto my chainsaw. Now, I scored this chainsaw for $5, and I started it up and it ran fine with a full tank of gas, and then the fuel line fell apart, and so I had to replace that. The mistake I made is I took the carburetor off to replace the fuel line, and this particular model, the Pp4620Avhd, it is a nightmare to work on getting this carburetor off and on. It is just the worst. There's no studs sticking through. You have to have everything assembled, and everything's attached to everything else. This is where the air cleaner fits on, the carb fits on the back. These bolts have to pass through, on, and you have, on the other side of the carburetor, you have two gaskets. You have a metal one, and then you have the paper one. Actually, I'll show you on the old carburetor, paper one there. So after replacing the fuel lines, I started up, I did a little test cut, and then instead of idling, it starts going faster and faster and faster, just basically running away. I'm like, oh, come on. So I got a new carburetor for it, though I didn't suspect it was the carburetor. Put that on there. Same issue. You know, what's going on here? So I thought, okay, maybe the bearing seals have failed. So what I did was I took some brake cleaner that's safe for rubber parts, started it up. As it's idling, it started getting faster and faster. I sprayed the brake cleaner spray, actually. Brake cleaner spray down in here by the bearing seals, and the cover was still on, but I sprayed down in here to the bearing seals, and basically you just listen for the sound to change. And I was getting nothing. So I thought I sprayed down inside here around this rubber boot. This rubber boot goes down to the cylinder. There's, I think, a little stub on the cylinder that this fits onto. Thinking maybe I have a leak down behind this rubber boot. Nothing. So then I sprayed around the carburetor, and when I would spray around the base of the carburetor where it met this seal, the RPMs would drop. If I stopped the spray, RPM started going back up again. So I said, okay, that's where the seal, that's where the leak is. Now, when I took off that carburetor that was a new carburetor, remember what I said, this thing is a nightmare as far as getting it together. And as you're getting it together, these two pieces start sliding and falling off as you're trying to shimmy the whole assembly as one with the screws, there you go, into place. It was just a nightmare, trying and trying again. And you'll notice there's a port. Let's see if this will let me zoom in and stay focused. There, you should be able to see that there. You see this port that's down the bottom, and it has a channel that goes up to the top. There is no port up top. It goes down to there. But the port where it's on the carburetor is up here. So the channel goes around here, because remember, it's flipped when it's there. Well, in the process of putting this gasket on and re-putting it on and having to fight with it, this gasket got flipped over. And so what we wound up with was, so there's the port comes through, the air comes down through that channel there. Remember, it's flipped like this. Comes down, and then the actual port's down there. See that? See that little hole there? With the new carburetor, that's where I was getting a leak from. If this had been flipped over properly, I would not have had that leak. Of course, that hole there, which is completely unnecessary, unneeded, is not on the original gasket. So that is where I found the leak for the new carburetor. Does not explain the old carburetor. I believe the old carburetor is just fine, so I'm going to be putting it back on again. Alright, backed up the camera here because the original take, I cut everything off. So, on the old carburetor, where was the leak coming from? Well, yeah, I'll show you here how this fits in here, like this, and it can go either flipped upside down. You can't reverse it like this. There's like a flange there. It fits down into the grommet. But and notice that there's the channel that comes around, and down here it could be that this, well, I had my fingers in the way. See, the channel comes down and around there. Could be that this rubber boot has shrank. So once I disturbed it and broke the seal, it just wasn't resealing it. Number two, it could be that these screws, the two screws that hold the carburetor on, they were so loaded up with Loctite and stuff and dried on there solid that I just couldn't get it tight enough. I was hitting the Loctite instead of tightening down, and therefore I have a got out my tap and die. I'm just going to clean up those threads all the way, and I'll put some new Loctite on there. This does not get as hot as the cylinder, so I'm going to use just blue Loctite. What I am going to do is I am going to put some sealer, very thin line of sealer around the raised lips that you see on this rubber bushing. I don't believe that there's any reason for this rubber boot, whatever you want to call it, to be decoupled from the carburetor, so I don't see any problem with actually using any kind of cement to glue them together. That way I won't get any, I'll get a positive seal here and won't get any leaks. And I'm going to hold it down with some 10-32, not metric standard, screws to hold it in place until that dries, and that will do two things for me. Not only seal that, but it will also hold this into place so I don't have to fight with it falling off anymore, because it just does not, I don't know, it's like this flange does not sit in here right, so I'm going to have to really make sure that that's seated properly before I tighten everything down, and hopefully be able to leave it alone after that. Okay, so I have that glued on there now, and I took a Q-tip and I cleaned anything that was excess, because you don't want anything standing up above the surface of this metal plate that would interfere with the gasket on the carburetor. And I took a little wire. Where is my wire? Oh, here we go. Well, this is from some Cat 5 wire. And I passed it through the port there to make sure that was all clean. I kind of dental flossed it off, and anything that was oozed out from there. There wasn't a whole lot because I just put a very fine bead around that lip that's on that rubber boot. And I used the Permatex Ultra Black. This one is non-corrosive. It doesn't have that acidic vinegar smell to it, but it also it doesn't adhere as well. So if I have to take this apart, I'll be able to get it apart, and I'll be able to, historically anyway, is peel that stuff off of both surfaces without any problem. So now I'm going to let that cure at least overnight, and then I'm going to get the carb back on and get into the battle of getting that all assembled. Okay, this plate has dried on there actually for a few days. Like I said, I had it screwed down with screws. Now I'm going to reassemble. This assembly here that hooks up the air cleaner has the throttle cable on it. I removed it from the handle assembly. 3 screws, just take it apart, everything's pretty self-explanatory. That way I have one less thing fighting me as I put it back together. The screws that hold in the carb, I'm going to put on some thread locker, but first I used my die from the tap and die set to clean up these threads because they were all packed with hardened stuff. On the carburetor, I am going to put, since I don't have a new gasket to use of this style, I'm going to reuse the gasket, and I'm going to put some of the Forma Gasket 2 sealant on there. This stuff is non-hardening, and also I can spray it with brake cleaner, and that usually will dissolve it, loosen it up in the event that I had to take this thing apart. Hopefully I don't have to. But I'm just going to put a very thin bead around the opening and around the channel on this side for whatever that port is, idle port, whatever. And of course, let's not forget the Poulan mystery bushing will be down there. With me test fitting things, it's popped off like 4 times already, so that should be fun. And the throttle cable goes onto right there, loops around. There's a little guide for the cable to go into, and there's a slot for the end of the cable to fit into, loops back around, and there's a hole there in the event that you have taken it apart or lost track of how it goes. But that is exactly how it's supposed to look. So now let me get the gasket ready and then start the battle. Part of the battle is you have to get the choke lever onto that hole. Yeah, I've done this a few times. Hopefully it goes easier this time. When you take things apart, you're going to find you have this little bushing here, and you're like, where the hell does it go? It's a support bushing, goes right there for your carburetor air cleaner plate. Okay, I have everything prepped, thread locks on there, a little bit of gasket sealer. This is how you want to hold everything together. Notice my pinky is holding the cable. Get some tension on this, the wire cable, the casing. You're going to hold with your pinky all together, keep tension on there. And when you put this on, make sure that it's going underneath the throttle lever. And make sure you put this on first before putting the carburetor on. Okay, I have everything back together. Make sure that your throttle lever works freely. This bushing, make sure your Poulan mystery bushing is properly placed down there. Can't really see because it's behind here, but make sure that your fuel line is running up through the channel that runs through there. Get this grommet back into place. Then check the function of your throttle cable. Well, let me give you a quick rundown on how the handle goes back together with the throttle cable. Now this handle isn't screwed down to anything right now, it just has the chainsaw motor sitting on top of it, but this square, after you've seated your bushing there, square goes down into a pocket there. Give a little tug onto the throttle cable, and this little half crescent goes over top of the cable. Yeah, fight me. So go like that, and then the nub end of the cable goes down into here, and then this goes inside here like this. And then when this handle's up, it should be locked and you can't do anything until you lower it. Then your throttle will work. And then the other half goes on top, and you have 3 screws to hold it all together. Now I've shown you where my problem was, which was at the carburetor, but you can have the exact same symptom with the problem completely somewhere else. And that's why one test you can do is spraying the brake cleaner down around the bearings of your drive shaft, and you would also do it down in there to get it on this side behind that fan, flywheel, whatever it's called. Spray it around the base of the carburetor where it meets, actually not the carburetor, there's that little link tube between the carburetor and the cylinder. Spray down around in there while it's running and see if the sound changes. If you have a leak and you hit it with the brake cleaner, your RPMs are going to drop. You're going to hear a sound difference in the motor running. Spray like where I found mine, down around the base of the carburetor on this side. Another thing also to check is there's bolts down here, 4 of them. They actually go through this plastic housing, through the crankcase cover. Think of it, and this is what it's referred to as. The bottom of the engine bolts onto the cylinder here. They can come loose, and you can have an air leak down there, so double check those also. Make sure it's unlikely that it would cause a problem, but make sure your spark plug is tightened down all the way. And there may be some other locations where you could get air leaks possible, but those would be the major ones to check. Okay, in fair and full disclosure, I did crank it a few times until it just tried to start, because this doesn't have a primer bulb. You have to pull the rope, actually does the priming for you. And so now we should be ready to start. Let's see what happens. Less interested in it running and more interested in it idling right now. Before, when it would run out of control, if I pulled the throttle, it would just die. So let it warm up a bit and we'll see if it starts running out of control or not. But so far, so good. Okay, it's fixed. If there was a problem, it would have shown up by now, I believe. So my next step now will be to actually tune the carburetor up as per the instructions on Steve's Small Engine Saloon's video. That, like I said, you'll find it below. But this is done. I should now have my my 20-inch Poulan Pro, I think this is 46cc chainsaw that I bought for $5, up and running with no more cost than the cost of replacing the fuel lines and actually buying a carburetor that it turns out that I don't need, because I wound up putting the old carburetor back in. The smoke that you saw earlier, that would have been from the motor oil that I put down into the cylinder to lubricate it, but I think we are in good shape. Well, if you enjoyed this video, and especially if you found it helpful, please like, share, and above all, subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.